Ozark's final season has finally concluded. Now it means it's time to rank all 4 seasons from worst to best. This is a very consistent show, so it's going to be hard to rank it. But just to clarify, even the worst on this list is still a good season. So don't get annoyed if I have your favorite season in last place, as it was a tough decision. Anyway, let's get right into my ranking. Season 4 is a tough one because the show generally has a slower pace, and while being split up into 2 parts certainly made it a bit more interesting upon release, at the end of the day, having more episodes than usual in a season while still maintaining that same pace did make it drag on for a little bit. But by saying that, even with the final episode, it was really rushing to wrap things up, which after such a slow moving season was a bit surprising. The real standout of this season was Julia Garner, who's been great for this entire show, but she shows off her best acting skills here, as some things happen to her character which allow her to do that. And I know it's focusing on how realistic this side of things are and how you're not meant to like the people, but Wendy Bird was just absolutely unbearable this whole season as she really takes over from Marty. And not to mention Jonah was quite annoying as well, as one of the characters that I've liked throughout the show. I didn't really like him this much this season, but as a final season it doesn't really work as well, because I guess on paper there are parts which naturally match the conclusion, but the way it ends, it just feels so unsatisfying, very anticlimactic, and it left a lot of questions unanswered. So although it took all the time in the world, I still wasn't 100% pleased with how this season turned out. Season 2 does a good job of gradually expanding the area of this industry and the connections they develop. We set many things which last till the very final episode of the series. Whilst I said Jonah was annoying in season 4, Charlotte was also unbearable in season 2. While yes, on paper her motivations do make sense, but the way it was played out here just felt like it was a bit over the top and a little bit forced. A real standout for this season was the introduction of Helen, who lasted 2 seasons in this show, and her presence was felt in both of them. It was just so interesting having someone who closely monitored and partnered with the birds, whilst also somewhat being against them. Buddy's arc throughout this season allowed for the character to have a satisfying end without him feeling like he was there for the sake of it. Overall, season 2 was a solid continuation of the birds story. The beginning of this show was a nice and simple story with not too many other plot lines, just the main story, which did make it an easy journey to follow. Like I always seem to talk about in every ranking video, this first season obviously introduces us to our characters, our location, and the environment and tone of the entire show. And while there is something unsettling about the score and color grading of the Ozarks itself, the show doesn't really develop the characters that much, and that is probably the only complaint I have about this season, is that from this season and the last, I didn't find myself caring about these main characters all that much. The pace is slow, but slow pace doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's just down to how a certain person likes to watch a show, and while it's not my favorite, I can certainly do with a slow paced show, and some really needed to tell their story, and I believe that Ozark does, because it deals with every small detail when it comes to money laundering and all the connections and ties it have with it, the consequences that they have to look at, and I think this season does that very well. Watching through this season, I was thinking in my head, all these seasons are very similar in quality, and it's going to be hard to make my ranking on this one, but the final few episodes of this season is what put this at the top spot for me. It was one of the most emotional experiences I've felt watching a TV show in the past few years. There's some really tough sacrifices, a brilliant performance from Tom Pelphrey depicting bipolar disorder. We haven't seen done too much on screen before. As far as I know, I don't know anybody with bipolar disorder, but from what people are saying online, it accurately depicts it. So from what I saw, it was absolutely emotional how he'd snap and then realize what he'd done afterwards in such an emotional way. Like I said before, he was the standout for me this whole season, and I didn't know he had it in him because I wasn't that impressed with this actor watching Iron Fist, but who knew? I like Jonah getting a bigger role this season. Before, he did really just feel like, you know, the kid of the family who's been dragged along to this, but I like how he gets involved with things here and he gains confidence. And on the whole, just the acting all around was very solid, and this season did have a strong end to its story, and that's why it cements its spot at first place. However, one thing that did bother me, and I'm very torn on it because the whole Darlene and Wyatt relationship, you know, it's gross. It didn't really sit right with me, but I know you do get that with some people, and I can't look at it and say, oh, that's just totally out of order, because I guess it's not, because it's realistic. But I do feel like it only happened so that they could keep Wyatt in the show, because other than that, he didn't have a lot to do. This was a tough ranking, which means that there are probably loads of different rankings out there, and I'd like to hear what yours is down below, and tell me why it is in that certain order. While you're there, if you could like and subscribe, it would really mean a lot. And yeah, sorry this was a bit late, you know. I don't like when episodes of a season get released all in one go. I like it spread out, and when you're busy when that release does happen, it can take a while to get around to it. But yeah, I enjoyed Ozark. I don't think it's on the level of Breaking Bad like some people say. I just feel like a slower paced show doesn't appeal to as large of an audience as the fast paced Breaking Bad, and it didn't really flesh out its characters as well as it could have. You know, what the people are doing in this show is bad. The same goes for Breaking Bad. However, that show just found a way to make even the most evil characters in that show likable. Whereas here, yes, it accurately depicts them, but none of the characters really had something distinct about them.